that would be his call. Anyway, thanks to the three jurors who managed to survive all of this. Thanks for coming. Let me tell you a little bit about the project, or there are actually two, and how the circumstances of the project arose. Both of them, and I typically do this when I do a studio, both of them belong to my office, things we're working on, and both happen to be under construction. One is a house in Santa Monica Canyon. The other's an office building in the central part of LA. And the discussion came about, I guess, earlier in the year when questions arose about whether a house was still a house, or whether a house was an office, or what was a house. And to juxtapose that, which will be the next step in the studio, similar or analogous discussions took place about office buildings that people want to get back to or never want to see again, or that work remotely, or how the circumstances that we're involved in actually would affect the design and the construction of things that were designed and in construction when all of this hit. And it probably revives a question of normalcy, in the sense that what might constitute a norm or a meaning for a building, or whether there was a norm or whether there will be a new norm. And if so, could we rely on that? How ephemeral is this? And I think the point was that we could speculate on that. So what we wanted to do is take the speculation out for the moment and obligate a commitment to the content of the project, which is the first project, which runs for 3 weeks. So it's done. So you're looking at the beginning, the middle, and the end of this project. There are 5 of them. They're teams of 2. So the discussion ought to be relatively brief. And the project is in Santa Monica Canyon, actually at the bottom of the canyon, on what the city considers to be an undersized site. It's next to a drainage canal that runs to the sea and is considered to be somewhat polluted. And then the sides of the canyon go up on either side and include some of the buildings and architects that we've known over the years. So why don't we go ahead and start? So this is the house, the end of the project. Why don't we start with the people we have? And the first group, go ahead and let us know what you're up to.
Hello. My name is Abdullah Hussein, and my partner is Adin. We're going to present first. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Do you see the title?
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. So our project is called the Little Newton, but firstly we're going to provide a quick look at the site in which it is located in. Next. So like Eric Owenmore said, the site is located in Santa Monica Canyon. Next, the single family house project is in 211 North Entrada Drive, Los Angeles, in a neighborhood called Rustic Canyon. The boundary for the new house has a similar dimensions from the under constructed house, with a height of 34.6 feet, a plot of land that is 30 feet wide and stretches 80 feet from the street access to the Rustic Canyon Canal. Next.
Those are the 5 views. Yeah.
Yes, these are some of the views of the site in the environment. Next.
This is the ocean view on the west side. More of the west side. And this is the canyon view, east side of the building.
So the street elevation view of the house, currently under constructed by Eric Owen Moss Architects. Next are the photos of its current interior.
Yeah, to show.
And slide after that is a view of the house from a small bridge that connects the street to the plot that has access to the site and to the other side of the canal, viewing at the direction of the Pacific Palisades. The quote that we chose is by Ernest Becker in The Structure of Evil. Quote, "The whole problem of liberating individual creativity versus ordered culture is summed up in these questions. Intellectually, the problem is, as all are Socrates in the West, to what extent can society allow the innovator to offer up new meanings opposed to the cultural forms? And the approach we took on how to eradicate the minds of the cultural norm is to retain much of the existing elements of the current site and the original house by Eric Owen Moss Architects, and to create a new living method that ties the client's personal and professional needs visually in the exterior and in an interior open space."
So for a post-COVID house, so our proposal is one that rethinks a single-family house typology and finds the current pandemic period an opportunity to break away and liberate architecture from the sociocultural influence and norms. Perhaps also start rethinking and re-establishing what a house is and what's its necessities, and most importantly, what role does it play in one's life in the future. So here we can see a program diagram of this, more like a sequence of experience of the house that we were proposing. So unlike a traditional house typology where everything is kind of connected in a more hybridized way, here it's a more linear way that each space takes it to the other, and there's a certain relationships with different spaces. So we have a central space here in the middle that basically connects the main spaces of the building, like the living, the kitchen, the bedroom, also the bathroom and the gym area and the study room. And along with that, there's other connections that also have access from other ways that we're going to explain later. So the relationship to the existing house. So as my partner just said, the existing house is currently under construction, designed by Eric Owen Moss, our professor. The relationship that we're proposing is that we're using a column system that basically is based on the massing of the original house. So we're basing the entire new column primary structure on that. So starting with the concept. So our concept in this proposal, one that was kind of inspired by bubble architecture or pneumatics. So I would quote from this Radical Bubbles magazine: "Inflatable spheres were conceived as spaces that could set people thinking. Interest in bubble architecture took off alongside progress in space travel and its popularity of science fiction. The bubble became a Paris prototype of a utopian counterculture, and we must liberate architecture from a building." So these are the kind of things that we started to think about. So starting with the concept, we think of this concept as basically sticks and marshmallows, where the sticks are the primary structure, the columns, and the marshmallows are the volumes that basically hold all the things within it. So as you can see in the image on the right, as the spheres expand, they would basically engulf whatever is around them. In this case, it's the columns. And then we have multiplicity of columns that have also as well other marshmallows or volumes that surround them. Along with that, we have a spiral staircase that basically holds and wraps everything together, keeps everything in place, as well as creating access points for circulation and bringing the entire project together.
So in the construction sequence of the new house, you will have to first empty the site and excavate 3/4 of it, starting from the canal side to the height of the canal when it is flooded. So a shallow pond, on the next slide, on the side of the canal is to allow the water from the flooded seasons to enter. A semicircle is excavated next to the retaining wall, closer to the street side, to become a 3-step outdoor theater. The vertical structures are individually placed in the site, while while still maintaining its relationship to the original house shape. The I-beams are welded to the vertical structure and floors are attached to the I-beams. The pipe structure, which will be used to hold the horizontal bracings. The pipe structure, which is in the next slide, will be used to hold the horizontal bracings of the spiral circulation, are initially to be welded onto the vertical structure. The secondary structural system is the horizontal bracings for the spiral circulation and are welded to the vertical structure and connected to the pipe system. The spiral stairs will be installed that circulates around the entire house, and the interior stairs after that to connect the floors in between. A mesh structure for the enclosure are welded into the I-beams as it heavily depends on the structure system to stabilize its position. Next is the concrete scale for the mesh structure and takes its shape as it's mutated in response to the squeeze and pull of the vertical structure and the spiral circulation. The interior closures, which have the interior stairs to allow quick vertical movements in between volumes, which are the larger enclosed spaces will then be cased in. The concrete pieces for the spiral circulation will be individually placed in between and are being held up by the pipe system and the horizontal bracing. Glass and mullions are enclosed onto the spiral circulation facing the house environment. A balcony overlooking the street view and a rooftop that has a non-obstructed 360-degree view of the ocean and the Pacific Palisades Hills is the last step to be added into the project. So this is the completed project in relation to the site.
So in terms of the site plan, as explained by my partner, we have a canal that runs in the north side of the building with streets on the other side and surrounding neighborhoods. So our underground floor plan basically invites the canal into the project. And also we have an amphitheater space that serves for outdoor public events and activities. The first floor basically is the entrance from the ramp into the lobby area that connects to the underground and also leads upwards. The second floor basically connects the study room with the central space that has the bathroom and also a gym area on the right, fitness and wellness center. That central space also connects to the living room and the dining room that also in parts connect with the bedroom on the right, as you can see, which has a floating bedroom that floats above the void overlooking the level below. And this is the top view showing the roof of the house with the terrace and as well as the view of the bedroom. So for the section, you can see more clearly the kind of spaces that we have. So here we have the wellness center, the entrance, the lobby. As you go down into the underground, we have the central space that includes the toilet, the living room and the dining room, the kitchen, the bedroom that connects with the level below the floating bed, and an office space that overlooks both sides of the canal. So it's a best view in the house, and as well as a terrace, roof terrace at the roof of the building. So here are the programs more clearly, just as explained. And this is the idea of the open space. So all of this covered is basically one open space that is connected with those stair structures that are made of glass and steel that allows for light to get in. The short section here explains the relationship of the different levels with each other. In this case, we have the circulation volumes along with the kitchen, the bathroom, and also the central space and the lobby in the bottom. Another section showing the bedroom and how the relationship of the circulation volume as it wraps around the volume as it wraps around the circulation structure. So this is the idea that we had initially. So those are seen as bubbles or marshmallows that basically engulf whatever is around them. And you can see this very clearly here. Here is the south elevation of the project, or the front from the street view, with 2 parking structures for 2 cars as per the program. This is the east elevation. the north elevation overlooking the canal on both sides. You have the living room that has a panorama 360 views and an office space that overlooks the canal from both sides as well. The west view. This is a worm's eye view, so you can see the project from below. Just explains different relationships we have between the different levels. And here are some renders that we have of the project in the site. So this is from the street view. This is from the North Cannon view, upwards from the hill, looking downwards on the project. This is LAPD heli view. We know that a lot of LAPD cruise around that area, around the beach. So they would also have this kind of view looking downwards on the project. And this is the canal view. And finally, a street view as well from the other side. This is an underground view looking from down upwards on the project, showing the structure, the primary, secondary, and all the other volumes engulfed. This is the bedroom space, as mentioned. You have the bed floating above a void underneath the wellness gym and fitness center, or fitness area, sorry. And this is the bedroom just having basically the bed and some shelves for books or storage. And this is the study room, more private, for more focusing and working. And this is some physical model photos. So the model is on the left and the section open. And of course, last but not least, because it's COVID, we'd like to introduce you to the architects, myself and my partner, Edin.
You can take that one down. Nice job. Okay, you get the hook now. Go ahead. Anybody want to?
Yeah, I have a question about like the beginning of your presentation where you were talking about the social and cultural elements that you want to take basically liberation from. And I'm wondering what those elements are, in a way that I think that those elements can define somehow the spaces that we would need in a post-COVID situation or time. And I wonder what those points or elements are for you, because I guess they're very personal. So
yeah, I mean, basically we tried to create a new kind of spatial organization structure within the house, something that is not pretty much seen in houses normally. So we wanted to basically rethink what a house is and how it could operate as a house, and what is a house and what is inside the house. So in this section, for example, you can kind of get a glimpse of the kind of things that happen that are not traditional, not conventional, spaces that are not directly open to one another, except in certain cases here in the middle. But otherwise, it's basically the circulation ramp, and then you have the volumes with access at certain levels. So it's not like a very conventional, let's say, sociocultural kind of norm. But it's a house that basically looks at the future and looks at the current situation of the pandemic and wants to provide the solution that is both sustainable and also architecturally mesmerizing.
Mm. Okay.
I think the question, another way to phrase it, is that notwithstanding you guys did a substantial amount of work for a 3-week project, it's astonishing, actually. Congrats on that. What you've told us essentially is what you did, less so why you did it. In other words, what the meanings are of the pieces. And when you call it a post-COVID house, you're making a guess. We talked about making guesses or instincts. We're not in a post-COVID situation at the moment. We're in the interim, whatever exactly that is. And one of the fascinating questions is, does it go back, or does it take something from the current circumstance and amend that. And the operation, so the two ways to talk about this, one is to talk about the pieces, the technical pieces, the organizational strategy, all of that, and somebody will do that. And the other way is to talk about those in relationship to a hypothesis about what a building COVID interim or post-COVID would be, as opposed to all the other buildings on the street. In a sense, what does it do that all the others don't do?
Yeah, I wonder, Eric, I mean, in terms of COVIDity, and I want to touch on this because it is of the moment and might be of the moment for a while, but I don't want to linger there, because I think your project makes some compelling moves in that direction, but they're not even in maybe the top 10 most compelling things about it. But I think the degree to which your marshmallows set up at least three sort of stacked zones of occupation, the idea of COVID sequestering becomes possible. To a less convincing degree, you set up kind of outdoor spaces that correlate with at least two out of those three. So if I imagine it as kind of three vertical zones that have something to do with one another, but could actually support people in different, going through COVID and having to be quarantined, I buy it and that's fine. But I was thinking as you were presenting it, I mean, honestly, it's a fantastic project, and I'd be inclined to explain it in more pretentious terms, because I think it could weather it. I think your house has a lot to do with Frederick Kiesler's Endless House, as sort of reimagined or actually literally restructured by Rem Koolhaas's paranoid critical diagram, the one where he has kind of a slingshot holding an orb between its, in its wishbone. And I just think I think it's a fascinating house that takes up some truly serious precedents in a compelling new way. I think the passages through it, I think your project is prey to the criticism that for all of its daring and for all of the kind of audacity of imagining a house as first framed by this kind of open splaying structural system, and then elements that aren't hung off of it so much as compressed by and deformed by it. I think you run a little bit of risk that there are a lot of very self-similar spaces in here, and it was something that was really true of Frederick Kiesler's house as well. For all of the ways he made a house resemble intestines in a way that nobody had ever imagined you could or would want to. I think with projects that rely on kind of orbal deformation, you have to really set up ways of making those orb-like elliptical spaces different from one another. And I think you've done that in some compelling ways. But to me, that would be, if you had one more, I can't believe this is a 3-week project, but if you had 4, my push would be for that kind of difference.
I mean, Joe, as a response to that, what's of interest about the comment is that for all the Kiesler, slightly different discussion, because I think Kiesler had a kind of originality that this probably doesn't, and working with things that maybe were buildable, but on the margins, and also this kind of conceptual fluidity that somehow what's orthogonal in a literal sense boxes you in a deterministic way, whereas something which has a kind of fluidity might free you in a certain way, at least metaphorically. And you could probably believe that in 1920. I think what's interesting about what you said is, for all the revolt against the normalcy of the neighborhood and its essentially orthogonal stuff, that when you depart from that, you have to be careful that there's not another motif, in a sense, that you don't forego one one formulation, which we all recognize, and put in a surrogate, which at some point, by the time they're one, then is there two, then are there three, then are there four? And in some sense, aren't you replicating the repetition of the neighborhood? And the argument against that is that the juxtaposition is between this house and everything else, as opposed to between the pieces within the house itself.
Fair enough.
And that's a discussion. In other words, does it get easier if they're one of these, or two of these, or three of these, or four of these? At what point does it become itself a rule and not an exception?
Well,
Can I ask a question, Eric? Because I read it as sort of a threesome in its own, or maybe this section makes my case for me, though. It reads very much as a kind of triple, frankly, kind of a triple townhome party, where you've got these kind of stacking back towards that waterway. And I so hope, Eric, in the actual project, you're able to claim some of those air rights and do something like this. That would be fantastic. But
no problem.
Just a question to you. Do you mean, when you talk about a multiplicity, do you mean if there was more difference on the block, would the specific differences of this project come into question in another way? Is that
well, I think that's the issue you addressed in your question, when I think you made the point that what was anomalous in a single sense becomes redundant in a multiple sense. And in doing that, the sort of the novelty, and I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but novelty in an innovative way, is deprecated if it's repeated and repeated and repeated. So the question is, does it become formulaic? And I think my response was a response that they could have had to the question that you asked, which is the juxtaposition between pre-COVID and post-COVID, or pre-COVID and COVID in the interim. Is the building as an aggregate juxtaposed with everything else on the street? And then you'd have to look at, are those four pieces, or they actually the way they presented it and argued for it? If you go back one image, back, you look at the drawing on the left, which is a kind of ethereal drawing, as if that transparent amalgamation of stuff is actually a single piece and operates as a kind of bigger room, where, because the spaces are assigned very conventionally and very typically. This is a bedroom, this is a kitchen, this is a dining area, this is an office. So even though the shapes vary, and the question is whether, if pushing those things together would have given you something. And one of the things I had argued for these guys is that they omitted, hang on just a second, Todd, we're coming to you, sorry. But can you put up the structural framing, Adine, or they'll put up the framing of the bubbles before they become solidified, that, which suggests potentially a different kind of continuity between the pieces. Anyway, Todd, fire away.
I mean, I think I have a related question. I mean, to your point about whether this is in contrast to the neighborhood or not, I mean, it is. I think there are a lot of similarities to the neighborhood, as has been mentioned. I mean, it's a building that is made out of rooms. The rooms are pretty conventional. But what I see is the real kind of the leap this project is taking. It is all the corridor. I mean, one thing that you're not going to find a lot of in that neighborhood or in, single family residential is the incredible excess of corridor that is being proposed here, which I think is potentially kind of interesting, that somehow a post-COVID house gives you this sort of route that you can walk. right? The independence of that, go back one. The independence of that route seems to me important. And now go forward one. There we go. One thing that you didn't talk about though, which I'm interested in, no, go back. See these guys? There seems to be a third system. You've got the marshmallows, the corridor, which I think you could argue more forcefully for its role in the project. But then there are these little connective tissues that you didn't mention at all, these shortcuts.
We talked about the chutes, but not the ladders.
Exactly. And so I think the difference between the chutes and the ladders are very important. How these begin to make the kind of connections between the marshmallows that Eric is asking for. So I think, first of all, for a 3-week project, this is impressive as hell. But the opportunity that I see is that you've actually got the seeds for more difference in place, but you haven't really drawn our attention to them. So I think I would try to make more out of that corridor as a new kind of domestic device. And I would make a lot more out of these little connective elements, which seem to break down the conventionality of the rooms that you've arranged, right? So if those could make it so that I have not just a bedroom and a gym, but a bedroom gym. I don't have just a kitchen and a dining room, but some kind of combined space. And can you begin to imagine more potent or imaginative combinations? I think you could. But that's really what I'm looking at here, is that I think this is at its strongest when it moves away from convention, but I think the sort of conventional house is sneaking in when you're not looking, and you have to be very careful. I think that the big corridor is a way to keep the conventional house away. And I think, yeah, that's what I would look at as you move forward. Are you guys
So
done now?
sorry, no, go ahead.
Is the project over now, or do you keep going?
Yeah, this is it, and then we go. The other one's substantially larger. It's going to take a little bit more time. Wanted to make one comment, Todd, and to the guys who did it. In terms of the interrelationship between the story you tell and the conceptual content of the project. Because, for example, as they told the story, the walk and the stair and all of that are somehow part of the incidental stair versus the systematic stair. If you associate that with COVID and the idea that, let's make an office building and every person has her own elevator, let's say, and the issue of circulating independently for the obvious reasons. So if that walkway and the little incidental ups and downs, the little stairs, had been understood the way you explained them as a very particular and pragmatic response to issues of getting around and not bumping into 6 characters on the way, then it immediately takes on, and you explain it differently, you probably organize it differently, and then it fits more in the argument of what's coming next and why. As soon as you say that, it raises all the questions about circulation and movement in houses and office buildings and guests and so on and so on. That just seems to be a really constructive point. Angelica, did you want to make any comment, or have you had enough of this one?
No, I just wanted to suggest maybe a project that you want to look into. The Angewandte, the proposal for the renovation of the Angewandte by Wolfgang Chapeller. Because
do you mind writing it down on the chat?
Yeah, I can put the drop.
Are you talking about that competition?
Yeah, I'm talking about the competition,
which was obviously a subject of a lot of rancor and debate.
Yeah,
this is delicate territory we're entering into.
I'm sorry,
no, it's good.
but I don't know. Somehow I would think about that project for 2 reasons. Once, because they were also working with sort of like pneumatic structures or like kind of like bubbles, and on the other side, because it's a project that sits in between the before and after, since it's a renovation. So it's kind of like, it needs to be like the medium between what the school was before and the school has to become afterwards. And a little bit in your case with the house where, as Eric was saying, it's kind of like hard to think about the post-COVID since we are still amid the COVID situation, but maybe you can start thinking about a time in between the two, like the before and the after. So that's why I was thinking about the project, and also because of the diversification of the space. It's not only bubbles, it's like something in between a more rigid structure and more curvilinear spaces. So maybe
Was that, Angelica, maybe you know, I mean, I obviously remember that competition. The question is, was it, I mean, it was published in a sort of blog magazine kind of thing, and everybody was bitching for various reasons. The question is, did the school, I doubt this, did the Angewandte ever put it together in a brochure, a book, and publish it? Is there a print version of that?
No, the only thing that I've seen are the renderings that actually a friend of mine did for Chapeller. That's the only thing that is available for the public, but no plans, no section, no drawings, nothing else.
Right.
And then the Angewandte went for a completely different project. I mean, they just finished
right. I mean, the story of that is we talk about that in Starbucks someday. Anyway, thanks, guys.
So Eric, real quick, just to build on what Angelica just said, which I think was a very smart comment, but the possibility of seeing this, there's a before and after COVID way to look at this. And I wonder if there's also a way to look at this as a kind of, you could organize the house in two different ways. It could be closed or open, depending on the degree of separation the occupants need. So like if everybody's sick, you've got to be in your own bubbles and you can kind of close it. You can still be around. But if everybody's well, you can open it up. And it seems to me that the house has the potential to operate in a whole bunch of ways, so that the diagram that this project begins with should be more complicated, that there should be more versions of that diagram, more possible connections that open and close. And it seems to me that, if you were to keep going to kind of look at that potential for this thing to be not just one or the other, but both, depending on how.
I mean, I think both in terms of your comment about the efficacy of the walkway in terms of COVID, and as we talked about, and the capacity to make one thing. I mean, I think potentially the liability of the four pieces is that they're discrete.
Yeah.
And they have to be discrete to be what you said, and they have to be able to coalesce in order to be what you also said in terms of who's together and who's apart. Can you go back to the model, Adine, or go back to the model? One thing that this suggests is that's the project, period. Or half of that is the project. Can you take down one model? Just take down the one on the right, leave the one on the left of those two. Right. And the question is what the meaning and the reason, I mean, it appeals to me that you would have very different directional meanings and organizational meanings. And in some ways, back to Todd's comment, it gives the bubbles a very different notion. For instance, facing east, which is the mountains and then the city, versus facing west, which is the ocean. And there are multiple possibilities for this because some of these pieces could remain as they were. This is just another option, another way to look at it, which I think goes to prove that at least where we are, you're never finished.
Yeah.
But I want to, Joe, did you want to say something?
Just briefly, building on your point, Eric, I feel like you could have played with the tire pressure of your four orbs, and at a certain point, with a little bit more tire pressure, they'd start to rub up against each other. Arguably, they might start to bully and out of one another, and it would have become would have opened up the kind of, would have hybridized the volumes of your project in a new way. But in any case, it's a great project. I mean, it's congratulations.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Okay, can we, took a little bit more time than I thought. Can we jump to the second one, please?
Yeah. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Myself, Nikhil, with my partner, Sean. Sean is going to share the screen. Sorry. Yeah, so starting with the site animation video, the site sits in Santa Monica, 211 Entrada Street, near the beach, Pacific Ocean. The site can be viewed from different angles across the neighborhood. Yeah, that's the site. There's canal on one side and the street, the Entrada driveway on the other side of the site. So now, yeah, so this is the site. So our house was designed for a single family living with keeping in mind the COVID situation, the pandemic situation. We try to give as many open spaces as we can, probably on different levels. Also, and space for physical activities like skateboarding areas. Yeah, so let's go step by step. First comes the parking, then the raised platform. After that comes the skateboard area, deck maybe with the structure. Then the circulation comes up. The second level of the house, the ground level or the first level is kept free of everything.
If you want to enlarge it, can you enlarge it and rotate it so everybody can see instead of just from one vantage point?
You want to show Rhino model?
I just want the jurors to be able to see what you're doing.
Can
You're
we
only showing it from one.
Can we share Rhino model if you don't mind?
Yeah, sure. You can see that.
Yeah, so this is the site with one side of the canal and the other side the street, starting with the parking area, then the raised platform. So yeah, then the skateboard area. With the structure for the skateboard area. Then the circulation. Second floor level. Third floor level. These floors then get divided into different rooms. So the third floor has 2 bedrooms and the second floor has a kitchen and a study room. And the exterior walls. Oh. Yeah, so comes up like this. The structure for the second wall. Yeah, so the walls come up. And then a theater space on the canal side. Then the circulation joins from second level to the third level and forms a loop of the circulation. There's a drawing that will be shown afterwards. Yeah, then comes the glass. which covers up the whole building and leaves areas like open terraces and the theater area and the staircase at the bottom. Then comes the wall near the staircase with a shingled glasses to provide as much openness, if that's the right word to say, yeah. And then comes the structure that holds the whole house. So there's only one specific shear wall, maybe, or the load-bearing wall, which is this one, like the whole wall. Everything else is held by these two structures, these three. And then comes the theater space for the canal side. And this is how it is on the side. Yeah. I'll just share a turntable, short turntable to show the house from all the side and explode it. Yeah. So this is how it is from all the sides.
Sorry. No, that's all right.
No, it's okay. Different level, different sides, and the circulation.
You're gonna do that and rotate it on the turntable when it's open, why don't you freeze it for 2 seconds? So it works like a still, not like an animation.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
Who's your client?
a single family house, like it's a single family.
No, I know, but you have like this skateboarding area at the bottom. So who's the client? Is like a skateboarder, or do we all have to become skateboarders? For example,
No,
I'm very bad at it. I can just sit on it. That's it.
I don't think the idea was to have like a specific client for the skateboarding thing, but the idea was to have some physical activity area in the COVID situation when you are not allowed to, like you can't go out in the quarantine times maybe. So you have some area to play, to be inside, and don't like not be inside a black box or the white box, but have some open area in your house. Kind of. Yeah.
For what it's worth, I've skateboarded the street. I bought my first surfboard 4 doors down and on the other side at a surf shop called Natural Progressions. And Rainer Banham took his famous shot outside a public school in a cowboy hat, 2 blocks north of here. This isn't a really storied location for kind of Dogtown surf culture. So I'm intrigued by the skate driver, just for what it's worth. I mean, I took building half pipes seriously enough in my youth to actually be very, very skeptical of how architects were playing with curvature in the 90s and early aughts, and really didn't indulge much in it because I had some idea of how, what kind of curves you do and don't need. You've got a really nice skate ramp at the very top of your project. The only skatable surface in your house is that tongue at the very top. But I like all the quarter pipes to nowhere in between. It's cool. And I actually do think, just iconographically in this area, I like the way both that it kind of has a nod to that surf skate world that it is, smack in the middle of, and also actually, and maybe more poignantly in a way, the kind of infrastructural nod to the canal behind it, which very few people are even aware that it's there. I think your project kind of keys to again a Banham, kind of the deeper palimpsests of the city that not much of LA kind of acknowledges. And I just, I think you're playing with these quarter turns in a pretty artful way. I'm concerned though about do you have some plans, or I'm just concerned.
Yeah, we do. Sorry.
I'm wondering how how these, you know, what price your interior spaces are paying for those moves.
Yeah.
So
So this is basically our first floor plan. We have like an outdoor stairs as well. So we're like playing with the kind of outdoor, like so in between spaces between outdoor and indoor. Also looking at how skateboarding that and living room condition could be like combined together as a program. So almost feel like this kind of activity and like living spaces combined together. Also, you have kitchen and study room looking all the way down into the space, and also terrace looking at the ocean, and theater looking at the canal. And also on the top floor, you have bedrooms, bathrooms. This is like a section you can see more clearly, like what's going inside.
The bedroom at the upper left, that's the one that is actually skatable. Although actually, you get some people that would do some cool things with all your stairs too. But,
Should we trust your expertise on this, Joe? Do you know what the hell you're talking about? Because I don't think anybody else here does.
Hey, listen, I'll vouch for Joe on that one. I mean, I think there are some.
yeah, Todd's got some credibility here too.
But you know, the issue as to whether or not this is skatable. I mean, at the moment, yeah, doubtful.
Wait a minute, Todd. Are you a skateboarder?
I'm familiar with the world of skateboarding. Yes.
That's a very equivocal answer.
I'm not a skater, but I was a biker, so I understand the ramps. But I also understand, you know, that when you get to the top of a ramp, you need air, not a floor. So, you know, there are some issues with you know, how these would work. But I wonder, you know, coming away from the skateboarding a little bit, if the house were able to kind of break down some of the barriers between the spaces, you know, could the whole house be skatable would be an interesting thing, rather than saying this is where you skateboard and this is where you sleep and this is where you eat. You know, are there opportunities for a bit more continuity, which the tectonic language of the project seems to suggest. But there again, the COVID question puts pressure on our, you know, kind of habit to move toward continuity. And what I would be really interested in this project would be seeing you wrestle with a kind of drive toward producing continuities and combinations of spaces, but also the necessity of segregating spaces from one another. And so right now, I mean, the spaces are segregated, I think in most cases, to the detriment of the individual rooms, right? They're not really great rooms because they wind up being very chopped up and closed down. But I think the possibility that this becomes a more of an interrogation of what it means to connect two things or separate two things. I mean, right now the connections and separations seem fairly perfunctory. And I wonder how they can begin to deliver more than, you know, just what the room says it's going to deliver. I don't know if I'm being 100% clear there, but you know, that there's, each room in this house is incredibly self-contained, but in a way that the relationships between the rooms are hard for me to understand. They just seem kind of like they happen. And I wonder, maybe you could show me how, like, what's meaningful about those connections, because right now it seems almost accidental in a lot of ways.
It seems like it's not dissimilar discussion vis-a-vis the first project, that the more the physiology or the form language of the building connects with, at least nominally, the content, the more credible it would be vis-a-vis the COVID situation. Because I think what you got here is the I like quarter round shapes.
Mm-hmm.
And all, so that's the essence of this particular form language. Oh, what can I do with it? And notwithstanding Joe's rendition of the local culture, I'm not sure that's still the case. And if it is, I'm not sure it is. And if it is, not altogether clear that this was a response to that, and more a response to what the hell am I going to do with the shape. But then I think, as you pointed out, it belongs operationally only to the ground floor, notwithstanding you bang your head on the second floor. And the rest of the redundancy of the shape has nothing to do with the redundancy of the use or the purpose.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a kind of, again, a kind of motif. And the COVID or the skateboard rendition becomes kind of incidental because it only happens once.
Yeah, and I think that also you have to be conscious of the other associations that come with that shape language, right? I mean, look at this right here, how it's starting to curl back on itself. I mean, it looks to me a lot more like a wave than a skateboard ramp. And this wouldn't be the only house in Santa Monica Canyon that features kind of wave motifs. And so, I think that there's a decorative quality to some of these curves and a set of associations that seem to go beyond your intentions. That's always going to happen. But I think it's important that you're conscious of those. Would it be okay if someone came along and said, hey, this looks like the kind of surfer wave house, cool? Or would that undermine the message that you're trying to advance?
I wonder too, Todd, something that would abet or, that would color that reading of this house, I think, in an interesting way. As I look at it, the longer I look at it, the more my questions gravitate to the exoskeleton. Like I agree with everything that Eric and Todd have said about how the quarter turn language isn't actually working, is spatial but not organizational at the moment, and probably demands to be both. But what really jumps out at me is the exoskeletal work and the question of whether or not you need it. It's too bad we don't have Jeff for this, because Jeff wrote really, really beautifully about a skate ramp in his show Mood River. He got very interested in the skate ramp that's hung in the middle of the Supreme space on what is it, Fairfax Boulevard, which the important thing for our purposes is that it's a very, very even egg crate structure. It's plywood that's woven, it's plywood that's exactly gridded. Like all the curvature is realized out of a plywood egg crate that's actually very even. And arguably, your exoskeleton, especially the upper parts of it, sort of added in late to this. And I'm not convinced they're necessary to do this in wood. And I'm positive they'd only be necessary for form work if it were realized in something like the concrete you kind of indicate by material.
No, you're right. You don't need that. For sure you don't. I mean, you can build this thing and make it stand up. We know that, depending on what you're constructing it out of, but you can certainly do it without the frame. No question about that. There would be another argument of rather than yeah, go ahead.
No, sorry. I mean, just like on the frame, because it's quite clear that the frame is not necessary, at least tectonically, we have to assume that the frame is necessary in terms of the architectural intentions. That frame, even if it's not necessary to hold up the building, it does seem to be a key player in holding up the argument that the architects are putting forward with this building, that there's something about the contrast between that frame and these curvilinear surfaces. But that, it hasn't been spelled out by the architects. So now we're left to kind of imagine what that relationship might be.
One of the arguments is that these pieces never exist in a solitary way. There's always a strut or a prop or a frame. When you look at it carefully, they exist in plan, they exist in section, they exist as the exterior of the building. And it's kind of musical in a way which is almost a harmony of the pieces. And the mistake that may have been made was to try to designate something purposeful in one without designating something purposeful equally and opposite conceivably, because the others don't mean, most of the pieces don't mean they enclose a space, or they complete a space, or they define a space, but you're working around them again, because the program, interestingly enough, like the last project, seems to be a fairly conventional program. And it gets interesting in these odd spaces that look over the canal, or theaters to the street and so on, where you break out of that.
I also think if there is a little bit of a missed opportunity in using the curvatures that you have in your surfaces to create a sort of like a pochette space where you can, in a way, liberate your plan completely and really use it, as Todd was saying at the beginning, also almost like making the entire house skatable, and put all, for example, the stairs or anything that is kind of like blocking the space, kind of like shave it into the pochette space, especially because you were saying before that this is like an undersized lot, so it's not really big. And one thing that you realize during the pandemic is like you have to move all of your stuff that maybe you had in the office. You have to move it into your house. So we have even more stuff than before that we have to storage somehow. And I think that's kind of like a very tactable problem, for example, during the pandemic. And it's something that you could maybe think about, especially with this idea of like kind of fluid continuous space. Maybe that's something that you can also start thinking about.
It seems, Angelica, like you'd almost have to, the kinds of spaces you're talking about, another round of looking at this house would necessitate those kinds of, or maybe they'd become legible.
It's a question, I think, Joe, sorry to interrupt, it's a question. If you look at that drawing, which actually for all the flying curves looks relatively conventional, and I think you'd have to, this is probably too obstreperous, but you have to blow up the interior of the thing, I think, in order to make that work. And if you did that, meaning this stuff, and so that you're working with the volume or pieces of the volume, and this guy goes flying through the middle somewhere from the top to the bottom, and goes off and on the curves. Because when you look at the plan of this floor, when you look at the plan of the top floor, what you got actually is a corridor and 3 rooms adjacent, and yeah, that. And the building seems, this seems to be really a non sequitur. The building seems to be worthy of much more than that.
It seems, Eric, I mean, a lot of what you need to live could wedge its way into the undersides of those.
Yeah.
There's a lot of pochette there, to Angelica's point. Yeah. I think low tech, and it's 10 or 20 years ago, but the practice low tech had a genius for kind of creating these multi-use curved environments that were really smart that way. I mean, Airstreams are kind of brilliant that way, and I'm sure it would happen.
Well, the one that interests me the most is the one where they occur at right angles to one another on the top, but they're separate. And that relationship is a kind of odd one. The other thing that would be worth considering is that the thickness, depending on how you actually supported this thing, that the thickness at the top of the curve of the slab and the thickness of the curve as it becomes a wall might vary. And there are all kinds of other things, like, for instance, if it's noisy, an acoustical surface on one side, essentially they wouldn't necessarily be 2 concentric curves at all, although both the inside and the outside could have aspects of curvature. So there's probably some work to do in that regard also.
Yeah, but another project that I think the students could learn a lot from is Johnson Mark Lee's Vault House, which, just up the beach, which plays a lot of games like you're describing, Eric, where the vaults work at 90 degrees to one another. Sometimes they're upside down, sometimes they're upside up. Sometimes they're acting vaguely like structure, sometimes they're decorative, and the range of possibilities that house exhibits, I think, is something that these students could study quite productively. And then also, that's a house that has a much bigger site, they've got a lot more room to move in the vault house. And so how could you reimagine the vault house as compressed to the scale of this site? Could you plausibly get all the stuff in a house that's twice as big as this onto this site? And what kinds of architectural intelligence would be required to make that possible, right? Because right now, you have some incredibly tiny rooms. You've given over a huge amount of space to circulation. And I think just in terms of sort of pragmatic organizational issues, taking seriously, like questions of efficiency, I think would make the more formal problems that you've taken up, like, take on new meaning or take on an intensity that right now they seem not to have, right? It seems that the world of the curves and the world of the rooms seem not to have much to do with one another at the moment, that they kind of exist independently as problems that you're solving. And I suspect if you were to study a little bit the vault house and other houses like it, you might find some ways where those two aspects of the project begin to, bump into one another a little more productively.
Okay, thanks. Joe, did you want to say something else?
Sorry, I don't want to be the tail end of all these, but
you're the surfing consultant here.
Well, on this particular, I know this is my backyard, and Johnson Mark Lee's Hill House overlooks your site, and it's got some really ingenious. It's doing other things in terms of its formal generation, but in terms of what Todd's talking about, just very savvy residential spatial efficiencies and kind of taking advantage of Poche opportunities, that one's worth a look as well. But what I was going to say actually was that I think it's another great project. I really want to end on that note. And it reminds me actually of artists practicing architecture a bit. It has a little bit of the kind of recipe. It feels a little bit like a Sol LeWitt recipe of this many curves, this many structural bays. What can you do with those requirements? But what it looks like a bit are the Vito Acconci projects, where Vito Acconci sort of tipped into architecture in the 90s and early aughts. And it'd be worth looking at some of what he did. I think there's some awkwardness to it, but also some real kind of pure invention to it that reminds me of this.
Perfect. Okay, thank you very much. Next team, please.
Yeah.
Hi.
Thank you. Good job, guys.
Hello, my name is James.
My name is Brock.
And this is our presentation for the Canyon House. We started with a text, and it reads, "It is not enough for the ideas to be great, the times must also be right." As Goethe observed, the innovator knows the value of his work. How is he to keep from being torn apart by disjunction with the world around him? Many, like Stendhal, take comfort in predicting that they will be recognized by a future age, that their ideas will find conjunction with a future time, but this still leaves the problem of the present life.
And we are not interested in finding conjunction with future time, but designing for disjunction in the present world around us. Only we have is the present life and the world around us. We start checking where the site is and where are the potentials and that we could discover. In the site plan, the project is a house for a musician couple. The site is next to the canal in Santa Monica Canyon. It is a small residential site. On the west side, it is facing the Will Rogers Beach, and the canal is pouring into it.
Here we have a closer view of the site, which is 33 feet high, 30 feet wide, 80 feet deep, and most importantly, extends about 19 feet into the canal. The main conceptual argument for our design is a pair of spiraling surfaces that generate the circulation and structure for the house. The upper spiral is stretched to form a void at its center, which leaves an elliptical imprint on the ground, which is pushed downward into the basement around the second spiral. And then the landscape is covers over.
And the spiral becomes supported by the spiraling tubes that we see now. And then the spiral, the central upper and lower tubes are connected by a vertical spiraling surface. Then the vertical and horizontal spiraling surfaces conjoin and twist to terminate into a front entrance. And tubes tied together with a structural rope on the outside perimeter. In a series of 4 elliptical cylinders are mounted into the void, becoming kitchen, dining, and bathrooms.
And then the building is encased in a glass skin, as well as the cylinders receiving skylights. 2 parking spots are allocated in the front of the site with a sliding gate. And then these are just a few axis cross sections. These are the longitudinal sections cutting through the building, showing the relationship vertically and horizontally. And then the other direction.
You didn't explain the piece below grade at all.
We're still going. We are.
I mean, you're showing it in section, but you're not talking about it.
Okay, first stage of structural development is the front entry with the structural foundation. Next one is spiraling structural pipes branch out from the main foundation and broken into several doubly curved steel pipes. And then central structural pipes are supported by the web of the perforated steel plate shear wall.
And then the perimeter tubes are tied back with structural piping. And these cylinders are structured with a curved spiral steel plate and then a lightweight steel cable structure, which is suspended from the structural tubes.
And there are 2 main areas in the basement level, the music studio and the lounge area with the canal view. And on the ground floor, main entry opens up to the spiral tube. On the outside, there is a pond with stairs and a ramp connecting the ground floor to the basement. On the second floor here, there is the kitchen and the dining area in the cylinders, both connected to the spiral tube with the living deck. On the third floor, there is the living area on the entrada drive side with the restroom on the cylinder. And on the last floor is the bedroom suite.
These are long section showing the relationship from the lounge. There is a skylight cut through the ceiling that aligns with the dining room space of the cylinder, which is kind of has a half diagonal cut, which becomes glass. So there's a vertical relationship between those things. And then cutting the other direction, you can see the kind of sagging dip of the basement or the ground floor becoming the ceiling of the basement, and the kind of oscillating corridors that wrap around the building.
You have a glass bottom of the pool, which is that correct? Which you didn't mention.
A portion of it is glass, yeah.
I mean, if you show that in the section, so those spaces that connect all the way up and down have a consequence in the pool. And at the bottom of the pool, and as an aperture in the bottom of the pool, which apparently lets light into the space below.
That's
the
right.
Underground.
Yes.
And we have the physical model photos. The model is a 1/4 inch scale. And we are showing the building with canyon and cantilever overhanging.
And as an aperture,
And then these are the aerial axonometrics. This one looking northwest, northeast, and then southwest. And this is the worm's eye axonometric looking up, and then the basement becomes removed so you can see the central void with the cylinders hanging in it.
And this is a render from the southeast on the Entrada Drive.
And then these are the aerial axonometrics.
And this one is from the southwest. This view is from a bridge across the site. And looking towards the Will Rogers Beach. through the canal?
This is underneath the spiraling cantilever, this pool that Eric mentioned before. So you can kind of see the profile of the skylight as a kind of halo underneath the cylinder, the glass of the cylinder. And we're thinking of it becoming more of a kind of garden pond area, like a meditation sort of space. And then this is an interior view looking through that opening, the aperture there. That is where we were standing before. And the stairs going up in different directions on either side. And then the final image is looking up through that skylight opening through the glass, where you get those different kind of lighting effects and that kind of solid void relationship through the vertical part of the building.
Thank you.
I like this idea that you have of like integrating the landscape within the house. It's kind of like something between an indoor and outdoor space. It's kind of like ambiguous, but I'm wondering if the entire ramp can become a sort of a landscape somehow, instead of being just like segregated to the bottom, if it can be a little bit more kind of like modulated, and the landscape it's intertwined together with the program that you have within the house, to make like maybe even more exaggerated these somehow the need that we have of like being indoor and outdoor, like within the house, since we can go outside. Just wondering if it can be pushed a little bit more than what it is now.
The perimeter of the walkway is glazed, huh? It's not open.
That's correct.
Open?
On the above the ground floor, it's open. This lower portion with the white is an open open ramp. Yeah.
It feels to me like the case for your party and the way this elliptical spiral would be made by largely by how it reframes the landscape, the ocean, and its surroundings as you move up through it. So just as a thought, and maybe this will apply to your next project as well, with these kind of spiral schemes, I would look both carefully at how they restage an interior as you look down out of the, into the spiral, and how it restages the city around you as you move up. Because here, I think actually I'd be more easily sold on this project. I think if I understood just how it was moving me, how that corkscrew was allowing me to see that it's a curious part of the city with a really interesting topography. And I think this project would probably restage that in a compelling way, but at considerable cost. I mean, this big spiral is, you got to get everything out of it except for all your plumbing, which you've put into the cylinders in the middle. And I get that. I mean, it'd be easier to make the case for voiding the middle more than you do. But if you're going to put all the plumbing in there, I think that last view you showed looking up through the cylinders was compelling. Eric asked about the glass bottom pool. And as he asked, I thought, God, if you have to ask about a glass bottom, like if it comes down to details like that, it's a big idea that's hinging too much on small moves. But actually, I think if those tubes were basically like kaleidoscopes looking up, where your bathtub is glass bottom, your kitchen table is, if you're looking up through people's lives and perhaps sort of dangerously voyeuristic ways, like then that whole inner logic of this thing has a kind of provocative frisson that I think could help sustain it.
Yeah,
There's another question in this which has to do with the meaning of hanging. In other words, I mean, if you look at the proximity of that, what looks to be an elliptical piece, aside from how it's supported and how it joins the ramp, all of that, and whether it would have been conceivable to run those pieces through, or run one of them through? Or would that defile the whole conceptual idea? Because it's pretty tightly packed, and the question is whether you get the point. It's not only, and I think this was said, that the ramp evolves, and it's interesting, and you could do a kind of composite drawing. You see very different things as you move 360 degrees, very different vantage points up the canal, and all of a sudden you're looking due west, and there's a house they call the Argyle House or the Harlequin House or whatever the hell it is, which is smack dead in the middle of the west elevation of the building. So it would be possible to argue the sort of vicissitudes of the ramp, both in terms of whatever it means operationally internal to the building, and also what vantage points it gives you, because they're all of some interest, except the one which ought to be the most prominent and the most essential, if you assume looking at the ocean is the biggest deal of all, and you can't do it. I don't think we've mentioned this, but the building in the upper left of this is an existing building, and it's relatively new, so it ain't going anywhere. So again, the argument of the shape of the ramp and the vantage point that it gives you would add another, if you went back and redid this, that the ramp isn't varied enough potentially. That was one question. And what do you get by flying it over a space, which is in the end not much of a space, except for the fact that it dives down underneath the site. So spatially, I mean, what you need is a drawing, like what's it mean to be in that pool, in that garden, or in that theater underneath all of those things looking up. It's squished in a way. It's not so open and it's not so free, notwithstanding the conception of the building. I mean, it feels like you could make another argument, which is to pull the spring apart, to tighten the spring. The other argument is to get between the pieces. So you're on top of the lower ramp and you're beneath the upper ramp, which is also, I mean, I don't know what that means really in terms of a kind of analytical understanding of that whole.
Well, yeah, and that's what I'm kind of struggling with here. I mean, I think when I look at this, and it's not, in many ways, all three of the projects that we've seen so far have a version of this issue to varying degrees, but it seems that the projects are keeping the kind of political challenge that Eric leveled at you in the brief that he sent to us a little bit at arm's length. You know, that you're making unconventionally shaped houses, and then you're stuffing them with very conventional house programs, right? And I think in this project in particular, when you look, the dead giveaway is inside the plumbing pieces where you're just putting what look like AutoCAD cells that clearly don't fit very well inside those pieces. That, you know, somehow it seems to me that the consequences of putting a conventional room, like a bedroom or a bathroom or a kitchen or a living room, into these unconventional shapes are not really being considered, that the shapes just happen. The rooms are assumed they will unfold. You know, like what's different about sleeping in a room like that, or you know, cooking in a kitchen like that? I mean,
I think that's such a good point, and it seems to think, as you said, it belongs to each of the projects. In other words, if you make something, the way that you individuate it and separate it from the rule and make it the exception, according to this advocacy, is in a sense to learn from the idiosyncrasies of what you originated. And I think the point you're making is the learning from the sort of primary organizational spatial idiosyncrasy is followed up not by what is that, as you just said, what does that give you as a place to sleep, as opposed to a more conventional venue for sleeping, and follow where that goes. In other words, learn from what you did and extend it, rather than learn from the experiences you already had conventionally and simply drop that in, which is a non sequitur, I think, in not a constructive way. So I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah.
What it is spatially is not ever what it is purposefully. And it could be. And if it were, the pieces would be attenuated or would become something in addition to just, I don't like to make all of these sort of odd references to buildings, whatever they mean, but one of the sort of archetypal examples is the thing Libeskind did in Berlin. And I say the thing because I think it was always of greater interest when it wasn't a museum and you just cruised around. And when it started to take up, this is this era or this century and so on, the unconventionality of it then had to accommodate a very conventional kind of organizational strategy, and it lost something as a consequence of that.
Mhm.
Anyway, I think to me, Todd's point is a kind of, Angelica, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no. What is the second part of the project? So what is going to be after this? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. What's the next project? Is that
Yeah.
the question?
What is the next step of the project? Are they going to continue?
This project is done. This is the end of the project. The next project is a high rise.
Okay, so something that maybe I would keep that isn't that everyone did in these three projects, I was kind of like focusing a lot about the circulation within the house, which if we talk about COVID is not, it's maybe something that you want to focus more in a building that is somehow shared by more than one family. So people that actually don't know maybe each other, and maybe they don't want to encounter each other on the corridor. Maybe there are like some ideas that you developed here also with the ramp that you can like bring to the next project, especially if it's going to be like a high rise where it's not only for like a single family, kind of more private typology, in a way that just to kind of like tie some of the ideas that you are working with the kind of like current situation somehow.
I think that's a good point. I think Todd also made a comment like that in the first project related to what you're saying, that particularly the movement, whether it's in an office building or a house is an office is a house, to segregate so you can get in, and you see all these discussions about office, you can get in, you can get out, you can circulate one way to the bathroom and the other way to the conference room and so on and so on, that the associations in terms of use with the pieces would evolve the pieces, would change the pieces as the movement system related to COVID comes to play a bigger part in the evolving concept of the thing. I think that's a good criticism. Did you want to say something, Joe? Or you had
muted.
enough?
Joe, you're muted.
Joe.
You're muted.
Back with you. I wonder, in terms of the COVID rhetoric of the project, I wonder if you would have had to take on maybe, I guess you have a double helix in the sense that it cones down and up, but I wonder if braiding helixes together might have set up a slightly different project. Then again, it's a very small project and a small site, which leads me to the other possibility, which would be to look at this more in terms of that spiraling dynamic mind out of a solid rather than realized as a kind of ascending snake in its own right. And if you did something like that, you'd be more in the terrain of Los's House for Josephine Baker, which has a pool that, you know, a kind of scopophilic pool. I don't know. I feel like there's something in this particular project, the grand gesture is literally swallowing everything else. And it seems like a tight site to get away with that, with weighting your moves so heavily in one direction.
Okay, thank you so much. Let's go to number 4, please.
Hi, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
My name is Jonah.
And I'm Devangi.
Can you hear us?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the project depicts a single-family house in the era of COVID. It's located in the Santa Monica Canyon. On the west, we have the ocean line, and north and south, we have the hills and the mountains that crawl up. And the site itself is facing 2 main directions, a canal and a main entry streetway. So we really wanted to emphasize the notion of social distancing and apply it in our design quite literally. So we began with a glazed volume, a central glazed volume with a series of intersecting staircases that lead to separate modular rooms. And this will be more described in our animation.
Our second concept, or the second concept that we focused on was the notion of privacy and intimacy that every individual in a household will have. So staying in this 9 months of house arrest, like we have realized that we need certain kind of privacy at the end of the day. So this house focuses on that idea as well.
So we're gonna
share
quickly share an animation. So this is the site. The rectangular block is the site boundary. And so we took the site and we carved a piece out of it to create an open air amphitheater that faces the canal. And so this staircase you can see is the entrance, the entryway to the house that leads you to a main landing. And from this landing, the user is forced to make a decision in which room to go. So this first allocated module is you go downhill to another library, or you could go straight to a dining room area that faces the canal, or you can go to another room, which is a living room space, or you can go upwards towards the more private areas, so the bedrooms of the house. Well, this would be a kid's room, and this one is the master bedroom. And from this, again, you can climb up, and there's another landing which takes you to a series of mezzanines which overlook the communal spaces, the living and dining. So these would be lounge study spaces. And finally, from this landing, you can go up a series of stairs which will take you to the main roof deck of the building.
This roof deck will have all the 360-degree view of the surroundings as well. So the full structure is supported by a steel truss.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
The full structure is supported by a steel truss, focusing on the idea of circulation and that main branching of the volumes.
And so this glazed central atrium, it would be the epicenter or the central piece of the house. And from this, these modules branch out and look at vantage points towards the canal, the ocean, and the street. And
we have also focused on the idea of opacity and transparency. So there'll be light throughout the day. And as being the tallest structure in the locality, it has vantage points in all the directions.
So now we're going to show a series of drawings. Oops. No,
Sorry.
Okay. Oops. Okay. These diagrams illustrate how the circulation functions from ground floor to the top roof. And the structure is a triangulated steel structure that kind of supports the central atrium and uplifts the whole building to emphasize minimal footprint on the ground. And the third vertical diagram is our concept of taking the actual bounding box of the site and extending these objects both vertically and horizontally to take up as much of that space as possible, excluding the kind of triangle wells between and around the central atrium with the circulation.
So this is our ground floor plan or the first floor plan, where we can actually see that the entrance is from the road. And when you go up and choose to go to the library, you have a vomitorium that takes you to the small open amphitheater that looks over the canal.
So the amphitheater facing the canal is essentially private, and you can only access it from the house itself. It's not open to the public.
So the steel structure actually creates an underbelly, which helps in creating the concept of stack effect, that if the canal ever has water, the underbelly will have cool air, and these wells that we have created in the center of the structure will actually carry the warm air out of the structure. Our design also focuses on, we created our design based on the X, and the X allows the structure or the people in the structure to have different views of the mountain, ocean, canal, and the road.
So it emphasizes vistas and vantage points. And this is a site plan with our section cuts. We decided to actually create the sections not in a straight line, but to follow the orientations of the X's, so the staircase circulations. So here are a couple of cross sections and longitudinal sections that demonstrate the relationship between canal and street facing east and west. And the section is cut on the canal looking towards the street.
These are some sets of renders that we took from the street, from under the structure, and above the structure. So this is facing on the street. So that's the kids' bedroom and the living and the bar. That's over here. This render looks on the canal. This becomes the dining and the study, and this becomes a master bedroom. This is the library that takes you down to the amphitheater.
And here's a view from one of the nearby bridges overlooking the canal and the building.
One thing I want to highlight is that the atrium becomes the epicenter of the structure. So, but whichever space you go to, you have to cross the epicenter and then go to the other space.
With a bird's eye view, a couple of images.
This is just to show the underbelly of the structure and how the structure is lifted up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we actually have a really quick, we constructed a volumetric model to really show the different pieces and how they come together. So this would be the ground condition with the theater looking out into the canal, and this is the entrance of the building to go upwards. And we have these large trusses.
We don't see it. I don't see it. It's not on the screen.
Oh, we're screen. Oops.
Sorry, we are showing it like it's with us.
Yeah, we forgot to unscreen share. Can you see this model?
Yep.
Okay. So we created this physical model to really show how the different modules come together. So this is the ground condition with this volume overlooking the canal, which would be the theater. And this other volume would be the entrance to the house that takes you upwards. And we have the two different volumes that fit on top of another. This way. To show the relationship between canal and street and which rooms look in what direction. And then finally, the central glazing piece that fits right in to connect everything together. Thank you.
Thank you.
So this is an interesting project. Again, let me, if I can, try to tease out some of the hints that I see in the project and try to tie them back to the prompt that Eric has given you. So your scheme, which I think is very, very interesting and executed very well, takes, architecture in the time of COVID, let's call it, and says, one of the things that COVID has done to all of us is atomized our lives, that we've become, compartmentalized quite literally in some sense in our own houses, and making connections is laborious. And so you've kind of made that thematic architecturally by conceiving of the house as a series of volumes, arranging those volumes in space, and then making an event out of the laborious connections between them, the circulation space that you've made, right? So it seems to me that it would be possible in this scheme to start to more meaningfully connect some of the architectural motivations to the kind of broader context within which you're working. So we think about that way, and then we look at the previous project, the spiral, and think, okay, one of the things that COVID has done to us has melted all of the pieces of our lives into one continuous snake of space where work becomes dining, becomes sleep, becomes play, and we can't find the distinctions anymore. So now we can look at those two projects and see two very different ways in which architecture can be reconceived based on this new world that we all live in, right? So one has to do with atomizing our activities into a whole lot of discrete spaces and capitalizing on their independence from one another. The other has to do with capitalizing, developing a new kind of continuity. Now, neither scheme went as far as I'm suggesting they might, but I'm offering these kind of alternative presentations, let's call them, as a hint for the whole studio, as how you might kind of push this a little more, push it a little harder when you go on to the office building project for the rest of the semester. Because it seems to me if you can really begin to make those connections, that the work is going to be stronger. I mean, so as you presented it, it seems a little abstract. It seems a little bit distant from the questions that Eric raised. And I haven't touched on them yet, but there are real political questions that Eric puts in there as well. Like what is the nature of an America in which the government seems to be its own adversary, or what else to say, that the economy is nomadic. That there are thematic clues that Eric has given you that I'd be very interested in seeing taken up more deliberately. So I'm trying to figure out whether the students are keeping some of those themes at arm's length, but they're kind of hitting on them intuitively, or they're hiding that work somehow. You see what I mean? So anyway, I think
I don't know how to answer. I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know how to answer it in the context of the academy or SciArc or any of that. I think there was, I don't want to call it traditional, but there's a very particular interest in organization, form, shape, space, and what the opportunities are, essentially in many ways exclusive or without the COVID discussion about the politics or the economy or America as its own adversary or any of that, and how those issues might be interrelated. I mean, I think you pointed this out 2 or 3 times already, that if you had just pushed the narrative of movement or the use of space, narrowly defined in terms of the restrictions that COVID brought us that didn't exist before COVID, weren't part of the thinking. Because one question you could ask is, would any of these be non sequiturs again in a world where COVID had never arrived?
Well, I think, another way to say it would be, has COVID presented us with opportunities that we're going to want to keep after the virus has been brought under control? Are there new opportunities that we've now become conscious of that we want to advance as the new normal for tomorrow?
I think there are, and I think the other point that I think both Angelica and Joe made in one form or another, that I would interpret as using what you've made. I said this already, using what you've made to continue the narrative, that it takes you somewhere which inevitably would be somewhere you wouldn't conventionally go. What do the shapes of these rooms mean? What's that intervening lid or roof over the ground floor, which remains a kind of intervening notch or something? In other words, is there a kind of purposeful conceptual making of this that gives a sleeping condition or an eating condition, or for that matter, an entirely new definition of those things, so that the nomenclature of a house and the rooms and all of that, which seems to show up in one way or another so far in every project, would be thrown away. And the other thing I would say about this one is that there's certainly a potentiality for that space in the middle. But the next question is, what is it? What do you do there? What's the role of the landscape there? I mean, if you shoved 100 trees up against the glass on the west side, because when you look out of that thing, you can, in that particular, where you've chosen to put that gathering area, essentially it's an introverted or a more introverted space, because it's juxtaposed with that building on the west side. You can't see past it, although different on the east side. So as opposed to incidental landscape, the landscape might vary, the condition on the ground is not clear. So what do you do in a collective space in a COVID era as opposed to a sequestered space? And what do you get? I think Todd asked this at one point, what do you get out of a room that's the configuration of which walls, the spatial relationship of pieces to each other give you opportunities to then build in something else, understand the role of sleeping or eating or whatever else you're doing in a way that belongs to the initial conception. And that piece of the discussion, I think, hasn't taken place very much yet.
Maybe I would also keep on thinking about if there is a possibility to have both type of spaces, the very subdivided ones and the ones that get connected again. And it seems like with this central body that you have, all those stairs, more than connecting, are kind of dividing the spaces from the spaces that are adjacent to the street and the one that are adjacent to the canal. And it seems there is kind of a possibility where maybe this kind of two fingers that you can see on the canal side, maybe there is a possibility to have those two spaces divided if you need them to be divided, but at a certain point they might be connected. They might become a bigger space. So you keep a clear division of the kind of two kind of towers. Those are always divided spaces that are kind of divided / connected through the stairs. But there is also another configuration that is kind of the longitudinal one, where spaces can be both somehow, depending on also the need that you have, because now you have very compartmentalized ones, but there might be a moment where you need something maybe bigger. maybe there is a time where we can finally kind of gather together again without being in our small.
And then you'd have to
room.
define that a little bit.
Exactly, that
What
becomes
does
a new
that mean?
space, kind of. It's like a hybrid. Maybe it's a type of space that we don't have right now.
Right. Joe, did you want to say something, or you had enough?
Pardon me, I yet again self-muting. I wonder if it seems like, Angelica, the argument that they're making in this project is that in COVID times, the voided hub in the middle of this is the way people need to negotiate the project and avoid each other. But I wonder if to me, one of the most sensitively rendered parts of this is the amphitheater dropping down into the channel. And I imagine that becoming a more viable communal space under different circumstances. So maybe there's a way in which the communal space of this project kind of pulls both up through and diagonally through it. And in a way, that negative space, or that void space, is to me spatially the most compelling thing about the project. I have to say that as Todd was talking about it, the big question for me was simply how differently, this project more than the others begs the question of kind of convertibility. Like, it seems very likely that this project would become it looks like a developer is trying to get 6 or 8 units under the auspices of a single house. And to the degree that it's that you say isolated, I'll say fragmented, it sets up a very different notion of domesticity in this part of the city, or in any conventional single family home part of the city, which I think is a useful provocation, but not one that you guys are making. It's interesting. As the afternoon has gone by, I've been imagining the different clients for these houses a little bit. And this project seems like it's for the most and the youngest. And the other ones all have peculiarities that I have to build in to make them kind of plausible as projects. But yours actually seems very, very viable for all the people that actually are moving around in COVID times, a lot more than people with as much gray hair as I have.
So when we were actually building it, so we had this idea that if, like, in this 9 months of house arrest, what we have realized is whether you're living with your friends, siblings, or your partners, you need your space after a certain number of days. So that's what we focused on, that everyone has their own space, yet everyone comes together at certain spots in the house as well.
Can I ask you one quick question? Why did all of the projects move into the canal to some degree, but yours more than most looks like a project that would have been more comfortable on a complete lot and simply presents itself as a project for a larger lot on a smaller one. And I found myself wondering, in this particular view we're looking at, if you had to compress it and somehow fight for more air rights somehow to get, actually your sections are pretty nice and tall anyway. I just wonder in this case I guess by going out into the canal, you get those side elevations and openings. I see the utility of it, but in some ways I think as designers, forcing yourself to deal with the radical compression of the actual site might have, I think it might have been a limitation brutal at first and fruitful later.
Yeah.
So this is always an interesting question, to what extent the project replicates the more conventional constraints on the project. And the constraints are tough. It's a puzzle. In theory, the property owners own to the center line of the canal.
Got it.
The canal is owned by the famous or infamous Corps of Engineers in LA. If you walk in there, they strangle you. So you can imagine we fought that anyway. In addition to which, if you do it, the local gentry, and that's not so far-fetched as, well, it's Santa Monica Canyon, ergo the local gentry is gonna bitch like hell. And they are, the house, for instance, now, as an example, the house is actually made of rubber. it's an interesting material, and an unusual material, and it's sprayed on, and the entire neighborhood is of course hysterical for nominally environmental reasons, although it turns out that it doesn't turn out to be toxic. Too bad. Too bad. So it's for all the sort of conventional discourse that surrounds the behavior of building departments and so on. Unlikely you could do this, to Joe's point, but in theory, you do own to the center line, so at least it's a hypothesis. The better shot would be Captain Hook, the world's greatest crook from Disney's Peter Pan, as in a plank. That you have a shot, albeit a long one, but sticking the volume out there, not gonna happen.
Well, it seems to me what hasn't been considered is, the nature of that channel. I mean, it's so pretty. A lot of the time ain't so wet, and occasionally
the site. I know the area.
I know the site very well, but like it's a few times a year a raging torrent of filthy water. So I mean, how you take that into consideration.
But it's fascinating, actually. Todd, where that you're 100% right. You know it better than we do. But when it goes out, it goes under PCH and it lands on the beach. And then the characters, the salubrious health guys that go around checking water, the grade of that is F. So you're
no surprise.
So right, but the sort of amalgamation of, at least visually, amalgamation of toxicity, and then I remember when Miller was a little kid and we used to go on the bridge and look down there and there'd be these little ducks and stuff. Yeah. So there are seabirds, there are various kinds of things floating by from God knows what, but it's a sort of, now, if you wanted to start to get into the discussion, which is going on with equal problems at a bigger scale with the LA River and demolishing the banks, and because actually the support system for the house is there's a grade beam like 15 feet back, and everything else that projects toward the canal on the site is actually a cantilever. So it's not right? So it's not bearing on the perimeter wall in theory, although of course that only applies to this house because all the other houses were built before anybody gave a damn. But the argument for taking the concrete down from the perimeter, from the sides and the base, and bringing it back to something which more approximates, I don't know what, a river, has been talked about, but it runs up against, but it should be talked about. Yeah. It's operationally, it makes some sense. And the sort of civil engineering conception of water in LA that doesn't work any better than utilities or cars, we should go after that. And they had the opportunity to do that in this project.
Yeah. No, I mean,
but in terms of you want to get into that fight, that might be, I mean, Frank can tell you all about that. They're involved in it, and they won't even dip into the LA River that he's been messing around for 100 years. So the Corps of Engineers were involved in a project like, you can go over it, which is new. But when you start sticking things into it, they get hysterical.
Well, going over it to me seems like a real opportunity. But one other thing that I wanted to put on the table for the students, in the way that you're thinking about this house, where kind of separate quarters that can come together into a kind of collective. If you haven't looked at it already, Jose Uberi's Miller House in Kentucky. It's a very large version of that, but it was built for a couple with 2 grown children. So it's 3 individual houses that live inside a big concrete cage, basically. a fantastic house, but if you look at the way that it's organized, particularly with the connective tissue of catwalks that connect those three elements within the house, it's doing a lot of the things that you're talking about doing. Now, Jose had all kinds of room when he did it, but how you could kind of deliver that possibility on a much tighter site seems to me a really worthwhile exercise. So definitely take a look at that project. I think you'd get a lot out of looking at it.
I don't know if the LA guys know his history, Todd. You could give it to us in like 15 words or less, just so.
So Jose was one of the last proteges of Le Corbusier. He worked in the office at the very end of Corbusier's life, and then he's the guy that completed the Firminy Church about 15 years ago in Firminy, France. So that big kind of absolutely amazing building.
It's too pretty.
You think?
In the time that it passed in terms of the concrete work, it's so pretty.
Yeah, you know, the thing is the light, the way that the colored light plays around inside that volume is just astonishing. I mean, really unbelievable. But I can see what you're saying about the concrete work being kind of, it's not Corbusier.
Well, it belongs to a certain time conceptually.
Yeah.
It's like the house you mentioned. I think it was you. Was it you that mentioned Kiesler's house?
No,
in the 20s? And if you were to build that today, it wouldn't look like the models, which have a kind of
there's a
lack of definition. Was that
like
you?
Disney, it would look like the Motorola, that house that Disney did. You're right, it would smooth out. That's sort of true of the Louis Kahn FDR Memorial as well. It's stone, but it's when you go out to that island off Manhattan, it looks like Louis Kahn, you know, with much more technological firepower thrown at it.
Well, yeah, right. I mean, it has to do. I mean, I would prefer the former, but maybe that's just an anachronism. It has to do with doing something when you don't know how to do it.
Yeah.
And doing something when you've learned how to do it.
Yeah.
And so there's a qualitative connection between Kiesler's models and drawings and what we were capable of by and large. And now it has a different meaning, and nobody could do it, and now lots of people can do it. So the invention that belongs to the time it was conceived and the passage of time before it was built, and you get something that the delivery doesn't belong to the initiative in a way. Because I mean, you can see that in the Sagrada Familia, for God's sake.
I was just going to say, Gaudí has that problem in space.
They're still working on the Sagrada Familia, which is no longer either Sagrada or Familia, at least. Okay, so we got one more. Thanks for hanging in. Can you guys hang in for just one more, please?
Eric, I need to leave, unfortunately. I have to jump to studio.
Okay, well, thanks a lot, Angelica. We have you back again, and thank you for representing the Italian and the Viennese voice in America. We need to hear from you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Okay, see
Very
you
good
again.
job, guys.
Very nice.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye. Okay, last guys. Kareem and Diliang, are
Hello?
you guys around?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Fire away.
So my name is Kareem and my partner is Di Liang, and here we go.
Okay, for this project, we love this quotation because it has a determination that we should build our own home. It means that this house is a proof of our own existence. When I get into this house, I belong to myself. So for this project, this house is a free zone space. It's a space for deep thinking. It's a space for introspection. You can have daydream here, and when we're going back to the original point, how we live, we sleep in the cave, we walk on the rocks, we sink in the wind, and we contemplate in the water. These are how our house should be.
So we're gonna start by the site like everyone else did. So the site is located in the Rustic Canyon in Santa Monica, California. So the site is directly accessed through the Pacific Coast Highway at the entrance of the Entrada Drive. And the site is bordered by the water canal that slopes down towards the Pacific Ocean. So we're gonna discuss the site potentials. So this is the site with the boundaries that extend 19 feet towards the canal with basic dimensions of 30 feet by 60 feet. So the view from the bridge is actually this one, and we can see the potential of the canal and how we could integrate it within the design. The second view is facing west, which is the Pacific Ocean. But the view is actually like 75% covered by the neighboring building. So going vertical is important to have a view. And the third the third view is actually facing east, which is this view. And it is actually it's the best view that we have in this site. And it is facing the nature and the hills.
Okay, going to the site design, the first strategy we extend the platform to the boundary of the property. And second, we divided the landscape site into two parts. On the source there are two parking lots, and there is also an entrance. And also we have an underground opening space, let people have access to the canal. And we want to create some opportunity between the people and with the water flows on the canal. So we sculpt the landscape, and the water are welcomed into our landscape, and it will fall down into 3 holes. When people standing on the landscape, they will see this continuously falling down effect to the holes. Under the hole, we have the container to collect the water. We will explain later how we deal with this water. And also the landscape is walkable for people with 2 platforms. So under the parking platform, we have a meditation space. From this section, you can see that we deal with this space. People will see the landscape with a very unique perspective. It's at their eye level. Now we talk about the structure design. So the first is 3 pipes goes up, and the tubes are connected to the pipe. Then the eye column will sit on the tube. These are the details how they should be connected. And then we have the surgery structures that will hold the slab, and the additional structure will support the specific form.
So moving on to the floor slabs and the circulation, this is a 4-floor building with one landscape, first floor, second floor, third floor. And the circulation between the floors are actually connected by staircases. We have a staircase that connects from the landscape up into the first floor. And we have the first staircase, which is the one that once you park your car, you get up the building at the first floor. It's a second staircase, a U-shaped staircase that leads to the second floor, a third staircase that leads to the third floor. And we have a panoramic balcony at the top, as you can see the floor slab, with another staircase that leads onto it. So talking about the envelope, this is the envelope of our building. It is actually a stalactite envelope that looks like a cave or a rock shape. And what we did is added a box, an intrusive box in the back, as you can see here. And what we did later was subtract the upper surface of the overall massing to expose the structure, create a floor slab, and then we create a panoramic balcony all around with a long ribbon window at the top, because the higher you go, that's when you get the best view and it will be panoramic. Now what we did was do the openings. In regards to the site analysis, we said that the best view is on the east, so most of our openings are on the east. And this is how we glazed it and how we added the mullions. And this is the elevation. So the paneling are regular and irregular at the same time. So at some point it's a normal grid, and at other points it actually follows the surface of the rock. And this is another view, landscape extension.
So now we deal with how we will use the water we collected. The first is in these three structural pipe. Inside this pipe, the water pipe will goes up to the top of the building, and then it will the water will fall down on the facade. And we also have this rings to control how the water will force. So when people stand on the bridge, they can see this. There's a building and the water. There's a waterfall on this building. So we want to make some contribution to the urban view. And another one is this is the first floor. Under the slab, we pour the water on these rock forms. When people are standing on the first floor through the glazing slab, they will see the water flows and falls down into the landscape.
So program and partition, this is the underground. On the left side, you have the meditation space that Dee talked about. It is a space that is totally isolated and it feels like you're in your own bubble. And on the right, you have the landscape with the water and the structural columns. And this is how it would look like at an eye level. This one is a warm eye looking from the landscape up into the building. And these ones is like the staircase access from the landscape to the first floor. This is the meditation space that we talked about and how it relates to the landscape and how the horizon of the water is at an eye level. This is the first floor. So the first floor will have the entrance, the living room, the kitchen, and the toilet. This is how the entrance of the building will look like. And this is the view that we get while sitting in the living room. This one is another view of it. The second floor is where the master bedroom is. So it will have its own bedroom with toilet included. And it will also have a balcony that will overlook onto the atrium, as you can see on the right. So we have a large glazing and a balcony that opens up to the atrium with a master bedroom. And then this is how it looks like. And the last floor, which is the third floor, is the workspace with a library and the wellness area, as well as the panoramic balcony that we talked about before. And this is how it looks like in floor plan. These are some interior shots of that area. You can see this is the panoramic view from the front, right, left, with the balcony. When the person is standing, as the person is standing there, he or she will be able to look at this view and also look at the other view from the other side. The 3D sections, we really tried to like have the idea of cave and undulating surfaces throughout the project at all sections. And yeah, these are pictures of our physical model. Thank you.
That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we should.
Hey, will you stop right there? Pardon me, will you stop right there for a sec on your first slide? There, just for a moment. This is a perplexing and provocative scheme. Fascinating and super sophisticated. I think in some ways, it's interesting to me. I think where it's firing on all cylinders and where where there are a few places where. Anyway, let me get there. But the first thing I wanted to note was the oddity of this diptych, that you're not actually mirroring. I don't think you flipped that image in a funny way. I think you've flipped it vertically and then moved it over rather than reflecting it. And it's an oddity that I bring up because I think there's subtle ways you defy expectation all over the place in this project. And it's what adds up to the overall kind of radical curiosity of it. But it's a funny diptych that image isn't a bilateral mirror the way you first think it ought to be. And it's much more interesting for how you've ducked that. And I want to, if you don't mind, maybe.
By the way, it could also work 90 degrees to this.
90
degrees, meaning that the line of the water is vertical, not horizontal.
It could be yeah. And I agree, Eric, and I imagine that would be interesting in its sort of. There's something oddly dissociative about seeing something you assume is mirrored and then realizing that it's not. And I think that, Todd and I were reconnecting. We're old friends, and we were connecting by text. And my first line to Todd was, "Cool, a scopic one." Because I actually really like it when students are careful about sight lines and what you can see from different places and how you take advantage of that, how you look onto a site, how you look off of it, how you quantify that, what mileage you get out of it. And frankly, just on a kind of partisan level, I really like your project for being in a part of our field I want to live in as well. So that, the care with which you're
saying it's very pragmatic.
Is that pragmatic in the sense that
it has an aspect? No, I agree with you. I think that's an interesting point for all appearance.
Joe, your point about looking at something that you assume is a mirror but isn't, that's the world we all live in now, because everybody's
this is very
they're not mirrored, and it's
but he didn't say that. If they had made that argument, like this is a literal rendition of the psychotherapy that is obligatory at the moment. And then you would have gone off in a completely different kind of, and it might be the same project, but again, you keep moving the discussion to correlate with the real current milieu, content, and so on.
This is
and the project seemed to exist so often.
This is a Rorschach.
It could be COVID or pre-COVID or post-COVID or COVID extraneous, irrelevant.
This, Eric, I think it couldn't be more apt as a Rorschach gone wrong. Like it isn't actually mirrored, and what you associate out of it is going to be perverse as a result. And I think your project is deeply that. I mean, I think your project is really strange. It reminds me, are either of you Miyazaki fans, Totoro or any of those films? Is that familiar at all for you? Okay, man, all right, I got a nod somewhere there. Ponyo, the one about the kind of weird seascape, builds on kind of Jules Verne and Eric, I think a world of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea that was maybe more my childhood and maybe yours. But
yes,
I think it's important in looking at your project. I think you have to take up the nautical logic that you guys are exploiting and actually get, I think it's both hemming you in and setting up all new kinds of possibilities. So the first thing you do is design the subscape of your project. Literally, like we know what your boat, the clearance your boat has over its bottom. And I think that's it's an interesting and unusual way to start a project. So if you don't mind, please move forward with some.
Okay.
I think, again, I'll get out of the way and let Todd and Eric speak, but I do want to talk later about the superstructure, because I think the biggest issue you've got is that boxy move on the southerly end of your project. And I'm wondering, if I imagine your project as a vessel of some kind, the nautical architecture seems to go astray in the bridge. It seems to go astray in that one volume to the upper left here that echoes the normative nature of your subterranean viewing volume, but I think but I'm wondering why it has to, and what it does to the rest of your the kind of entropic drape of the rest of your project to anchor a box to it the way you do there.
Well, but
By the way, I just to fire another vantage point, it actually doesn't bother me at all. I think the rule, and we talked about this in the first project, how redundancy gets to be no longer an exception,
fair enough,
but more systematic. What's odd about it is more the floor plan in a way, because if you made it to be, I think they called it a workspace in a library, which is quite okay with me, and you got that plank flying out that you actually can't access. But the floor is the form language of the floor is the irregular line that comes from the stalactites, which it probably invalidates the floor plan. But the fact that you could put those different pieces together, in other words, you have the surface of the curve, you have the surface more conventionally of the ellipse, and where that occurs, it's glass. And then you have another shape. I like it actually. And whether we agreed on it as a kind of final solution, I'm interested in the possibility that students could move out of there, as you make something and it starts here and it's like this and this and this, and it's constraints, and then all of a sudden, but it's something else. And so the limits that you impose, and then you go the other way. Anyway, blah, blah, blah. I can see it, and that capacity interests me to do something as if, and this isn't quite right, that another architect, or while there are two guys on the team, and while one guy was sleeping, the other guy came in and put this piece in, but it actually worked in a way, as if while one guy was sleeping, the other guy did the drape, the irregular K-form, and then he went to sleep, and the other guy came in and moved the glazing to the perimeter of the structure, and so on. There are pieces like that, and I think putting them together is actually pretty convincing. I think it's a very unusual project, on top of which, when you see forms like this, certainly in student work, that they often don't validate themselves in a way. And I think the deck up above and the use of the water, the association of the water from the canal into the pool, into that storage thing, looking out at it from the underground, falling down on top of you through this irregular stuff, it's pretty dense. In other words, you can get at it from a number of vantage points, which is one of the criticisms of Todd. You'd make something and then that's the end of it, as opposed to adding kind of extenuating circumstances, which seem to validate it more. I think it's pretty good.
No, I agree. I mean, I think it's a very weird project, but weird in a good way. Because all of the associations that people are making quite comfortably fit, but then they also, they aren't the only association. So, Joe mentions that it kind of looks like a boat. And I look at it and I'm like, well, yeah, parts of it look like a boat, but it also looks like an iceberg in dry dock somehow, they're kind of suspended out of the water. But then as soon as I start to look at it as an iceberg, it starts to morph into something else, right? The project seems very accomplished in making a lot of associations. So then when I look at it from the top, the iceberg doesn't have any kind of mass anymore. Now it looks like a curtain. And so the way that the building kind of accrues associations, but never becomes beholden to any one of them, I think is super interesting. I'm not sure to what end that operates, but you know, if the project could, you know, it starts to seem to me like a project that's trying to be more than it ever possibly could be, and strangely succeeding at that. Like, I'm a boat and an iceberg and a curtain and a waterfall and then when I go, and even in the way that the materials begin to express themselves, where, you know, the outside, the renderings anyway, give the impression of something that's quite kind of rough or sort of hewn out of stone somehow. But then I get to the inside and it seems impossibly slick. You know, the steel is very crisp and shiny. You know, like, look at that. I mean, you would never in a million years imagine that to be the inside of that thing we were just looking at the outside of. And yet, as Eric was saying, it somehow works. You know, that the building is kind of going for broke in its associations. And I think that the two of you are doing a pretty good job staying, like, you know, one step ahead. You know, like there's always more. Now, the danger is, you know, how long can you keep running? You know, at a certain point you have to stop. And what are you left with once you've stopped? But I think, you know, that's not a bad place to be, particularly as a student, you know, that to demonstrate that you can.
I mean, this is great, actually. And it's not only a question for Todd Gannon and Franz Kafka. It's like, where's the end?
Yeah.
You know, I was just looking at a translation. I was actually talking with Jeff about this, of the Castle novel, which just ends in the middle of a sentence. And I'm not sure how to extrapolate that to a building, but there is, I think, a point, and I think the students in this class, for whatever reason, a point of diminishing return, proverbially, because they keep adding stuff. And so one of the discussions we've had over the last 3 weeks is, that's enough. Let's figure out what we got, which is already 10 times more complicated. Let's deliver that credibly, which accounts for more conventional drawings and plans and sections and structure and circulation. So it's intelligible. And I think that's, but I think there's a kind of versatility in this thing.
Yeah.
Form language versatility, not the limiting factor, but the Kiesler factor, as in open-ended, but way more open-ended than Kiesler, benefiting 100 years of time pass, of course. And it seems to me that capacity is important for the students. And one more thing that I wanted to say, I don't know, and maybe we should discuss this a little for 2 seconds, whether you gain anything at all by saying, oh, it looks like a blue whale, or it looks like a boat, or something. Or, and the architect even said this, that it looks like the stalactites inside a cave. So the architect kind of asked for it,
right? Actually.
And it seems to me people do that, and certainly civilians do it, and there are associations. My sense is it's better to stay away from that, but that doesn't mean everybody will. And the question is how to respond. I mean, if Todd says to the architects, it looks like a boat, and therefore, is that good? Is that bad? Is that relevant? Or what do you do with that?
Well, this is an interesting question to come from the author of the Beehive, the Waffle, the Pterodactyl. Yeah,
But those names didn't come from, no, we've talked about, but those names don't come from me in most cases.
Yeah.
The pterodactyl did, but that's an argument, you know. In other words, if it's coming, do you steal the ground away and say, okay, I did the blue whale or something? Because the next guy's going to call it a blue whale. I don't know. I'm just raising the question. Does it cartoon the critical discussion or not?
Yeah, and I think it's a good question to.
I think Joe's trying to talk, but I think Joe, is your mic off? I can't see them.
I can't tell. I think.
Oh, yeah, you know, you're okay. Go ahead.
Can you hear me all right? You know, Todd, to your point, I mean, it's interesting to me, Eric, that I actually see a difference between a caution about naming and circumscribing the possibilities of a project as it comes into focus, and living with the kind of language play that happens in the wake of a project's completion and how you deal with that. Those to me are two very different things. I think your point to students as their projects evolve is really well taken, that not allowing that, you know, I actually think those riffs can be useful, but keeping them play, not allowing them to bound the work is important. And I agree that actually, to the degree that I went to a kind of nautical framework for trying to make sense of this last project, brings with it a set of expectations and limitations that aren't necessarily to the project's in the project's best interest. And it's interesting, the process that you're describing, Eric, to put another name to it, is the logic of exquisite corpse, where where different people work on things, they fold a sheet of paper, they do what they do with their face of the sheet of paper, someone else does something with another face, you open it up and you end up with this kind of hybrid creation that none of you could have invented or have named along the way. And I think that methodology, to the degree that it's at all related to what you're doing with the studio, is super interesting, and you know, like, I think you're getting incredible mileage out of that. So I want to.
Michael used to do that, you know, Joe. Michael Sorkin used to teach a studio literally like that. Like, you do a piece and I do a piece, and you keep yours hidden and I keep mine hidden, and then all of a sudden you stick them together. And
he named his book for it. And you know, and there's a whole, for Michael, and I think people like Michael, even the politics of the exquisite corpse and democratizing creativity, and it was important for him.
Right, he was way into that.
But what's interesting about this project is there seems to have been another step, you know, where exquisite corpse usually, you know, it normally gets a lot of mileage out of the joint between the various pieces. And this thing seems very slippery. It becomes very difficult sometimes to identify where the joint actually happens. It seems to be, you know, it's exquisite corpse, yeah, but also integrated in a way that I would never expect the exquisite corpse model to be able to produce.
Yeah, you're right.
I think that's right. I think this one doesn't have a joint. In the end, as I see it, this is one architect or one architect team. It's consistent enough from one end to the other that it evolves as it moves from one conceptual form language through another. I think it's, I don't know the explanatory language for this, but the associations run backwards and forwards. Yeah. Like they belong to each other, like the joints in the cave reform in the joints of the glazing.
It's recursive.
It's
recursive.
I think so.
Even their ploy with water echoes that, I think, in a really
right. It's it has a kind of thoroughness. Anyway, I want to thank you guys a lot, everybody in 10 different time zones. So I appreciate people at 6 in the morning and 9 at night. It's very nice of you. So maybe we'll get back and rerun this at some point later on in the semester, and you guys can see how this thing is advanced. So thanks to Angelica, and thanks to Todd Gannon, and thanks to Joe Day. And sorry, Kipnis was slightly uncomfortable. So if we get Jeff next time, we'll have to keep it off the YouTube or whatever it is. And I just want to say to the students, we'll send, great job. We'll send out to you in the next day or so the material on the high-rise site, and then we'll get together again, I guess, Wednesday and talk about it a little bit. So thank you again, everybody. Terrific. See you soon.
Nice.
Don't get sick.
Thank
you. Great
Thanks,
job.
everybody.
Right.
Great work. Good to see you guys.
Good to see you, Todd. Hang in there, baby.
Hey, you too.
Take care. Bye, Joe.
Eric, thank you.